With 255 episodes, the show had plenty of time to rack up a laundry list of goofs and mistakes. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of the biggest mistakes you probably never noticed throughout the MASH series. Comic Books from the Future, Season 1, Episode 15, Turtle. Everybody knows that Radar is a comic book nerd. It seems like anytime he's got a little downtime, he's seen delving into the world of science fiction. But it's important to remember that the show takes place during the Korean War, so it's set in the early 50s. So how in the heck did Radar manage to add comics from decades later to his impressive collection? In this episode, we catch a glimpse of our goofy, geeky friend with his nose in a copy of the 10th issue of Captain Savage and his Battlefield Rangers. This seems innocent enough until you realize that that particular comic didn't hit the shelves until January of 1969. These out-of-place objects are a recurring fixture of the show. Unless you have a sharp eye, you'd probably never notice most of these idiosyncrasies. Lucky for you, we've caught these and other mistakes. Keep watching for more. Chocolate Barcode, Season 11, Episode 14, Give and Take. We all enjoy a tasty chocolate bar from time to time. Maybe you've picked up a Hershey bar and curled up on the couch to watch your favorite TV show, MASH, only to discover this error. The Universal Product Code, commonly known as a UPC barcode, is a familiar sight. Pretty much every consumer product has had one of these since 1976, when they were first created and widely used. They've made life easier for cashiers and business owners alike. But in this episode of MASH, they've created more of a headache. Sergeant Klinger does a good deed to a badly injured North Korean soldier by handing him a sweet sugary treat. While it's arguable that chocolate is the first thing that you need when you're wounded in battle, it's the thought that counts, right? When the soldier accepts the token of goodwill, he flips the packaging upside down to reveal a UPC barcode. Whoops! Since the show takes place during the Korean War in the 1950s, this object shouldn't exist for at least another 20 years. Visible Actor Tease, Season 10, Episode 1, That's Showbiz. This episode's name ironically lines up perfectly with the mistake it contains. In show business, actors are directed where they should be standing for a particular shot by a T-shaped marker on the ground that denotes which direction and angle they should be facing. When you hear the phrase, "on your marks," that's what's being referred to. Ideally, the audience should never see these marks. They are purely there for directorial purposes. At the end of this episode, following a tear-jerker moment of Father Mulcahy saying goodbye to Sarah, the camera pans out to a wide-angle shot. Here, we can see very visible rubber T markers on the ground. You can clearly see the first one right behind Father Mulcahy. Where Sarah was once standing is a white rubber T mark. The second can be seen when Father Mulcahy runs over and bumps into Nurse Kaylani Kelly. When they collide, some dirt is kicked up, revealing yet another black T marker. Clear the Set, Season 10, Episode 6, Communication Breakdown. This episode may be about a breakdown in communication, but what it really highlights is a breakdown in production. Yet again, something must have slipped through the cracks because a member of the production crew can clearly be seen where they shouldn't be. When Major Charles is fraternizing with Colonel Potter and Margaret, a nurse announces there's a newspaper. In the 4077th, newspapers are like gold. Everyone quickly rushes around Charles, eagerly trying to get a glimpse at the latest headlines. Charles does what every good army surgeon would do and lays out the ground rules for reading the paper. In the background of this shot, slightly covered by a signpost, we see an unfamiliar face. If you look closely, you can see a blond man with long hair and beard dressed in a blue shirt and white pants. With this outfit, it's unlikely he's a character or an extra in the show. Looks like somebody in the production team snuck into the shot. Mickey Mishap, Season 5, Episode 11, The Colonel's Horse. In this beloved episode, Radar spells out the name Hayden, which happens to be the name of BJ's father-in-law. Radar spells out the name Hayden, which happens to be the name of BJ's father-in-law. Hawkeye, being the wisecracking goofball he is, quickly interjects with MOUSE. This probably went completely unnoticed by most audiences, unless they've seen the Mickey Mouse Club, whose theme song was the source material for the joke. As you might have guessed, the Mickey Mouse Club first aired in 1955, a few years after the Korean War. So either Hawkeye needs to collect some long overdue royalties from Disney, or this reference was ahead of its time in error. As much as I want to side with Hawkeye here, I'm guessing the latter is more accurate. Kentucky Derby Day Debacle. Season 6, Episode 22, Potter's Retirement. In this episode, our old buddies Radar, BJ, and Hawkeye find a letter of correspondence from Corporal Benson to I-Corps. Radar brings it to the attention of the others that Corporal Benson had been there since the month of June. Later on in this very same episode, Colonel Potter, Hawkeye, Radar, and BJ confront Benson, and he says he's there on direct orders of Colonel Potter. Potter says he vividly recalls the Colonel being around for a couple months. And this is where things get messy, because this episode takes place on Kentucky Derby Day. If Benson has only been at the 4077th for a couple of months, and he arrived in June as he said, then it couldn't be the day of the Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky Derby event is always held on the first Saturday in May, so using the 2 months that Benson was supposedly there, the episode should be taking place in August, not the month of May. Hula Hoop, Season 5, Episode 7, Dear Sigmund. The hula hoop is a beloved childhood toy. Whether you can keep one up or not, you've no doubt played around with one of these plastic hoops at some point in your life. This universal familiarity is likely why Sergeant Maxwell Klinger would reference them when he said he was willing to wear hula hoops in his ears if it would result in him getting a discharge. But not so fast. The hula hoop wouldn't be released by the toy company Wham-O until 1958, and it wouldn't be until 1962 that these toys were officially known as hula hoops. Funny enough, in a later episode, Klinger would eventually try to convince his old buddy Charles to invest in a revolutionary new toy idea. Can you guess what it might be? After observing Korean children playing with tubing, he got the bright idea to invent a hula hoop. Henry's Freakishly Talented Baby, Season 3, Episode 24, Abyssinia Henry. In an earlier episode, it's established that Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake is the father of 3 children, 2 daughters by the names of Molly and Janie, and 1 son, Andrew, who was born while Henry was deployed in Korea. However, something kind of odd happens. When Henry gets his discharge papers, he tells Radar he's going to have to wait to call his family to tell them the good news, because Andrew would likely be practicing his trombone. Doing a bit of quick math calculating the time that Henry has been in Korea, his son can be no older than 18 months. I don't know about you, but I've never met a baby that could play the trombone. Back to the Future, again. Season 5, Episode 22, Movie Night. In this episode, the 4077th get together to watch a movie. The movie featured is the Henry Fonda classic My Darling Clementine, which was released in 1946. This was a sensible pick considering the show takes place in the early 1950s, so that's nothing unusual. In this episode, however, Radar decides to spice things up with his best John Wayne impression. In his best Southern drawl, he begins to quote a famous scene from McClintock. As many observant viewers might have noticed, this film wasn't released until nearly a decade after the end of the Korean War. We're on to you, Radar. MASH Malpractice. Season 1, Episode 4, Chief Surgeon Who? You'd think that military medics would practice safe hygiene practices, but in this episode, we find that all common sense has gone down the drain. In the last leg of this episode, Hawkeye is seen having just finished an operation when Frank calls him over asking for a helping hand. Hawkeye eagerly wants to help, so he jumps into action. He approaches the patient and places his uncleaned, bloody hands right into the abdomen of the patient. There's some serious hygienic and health safety hazards here. Thank goodness they're not real doctors. What about Andrew Henry, Season 2, Episode 6, Kim? Remember Henry's trombone-playing 1-year-old? Well, apparently that little prodigy is pretty forgettable, because in this episode, Henry gets in an argument with Hawkeye and Trapper about an orphan. While they want to send him to an orphanage, Henry says, "You think I want to send this little fella away? I got 2 kids of my own. I'm a former child myself." We already established that Henry's first 2 children are his daughters, Molly and Janie. At the end of Season 1, we learn that Henry's wife gave birth to a baby boy named Andrew. Henry repeatedly expresses his heartache having not met his son yet, but here he clearly forgets all about the little one. Go figure. An extra Christmas. The good folks at the 4077th celebrate 4 Christmases spanning the show's run. That might not seem too surprising considering the show ran for 11 seasons. But this has to be some sort of Christmas miracle because the Korean War spanned only 3 years. There's no way the doctors and nurses would have stuck around to see 4 holiday seasons. Maybe the jolly old man himself decided to gift them a little extra good cheer. But our money is on this being yet another continuity error. Get your timeline straight, MASH. Alan Alda and Jamie Farr served in the U.S. Army. Alan Alda, the actor who played Hawkeye Pierce, served in Korea in the Army Reserve for 6 months. Jamie Farr played Maxwell Klinger, and he was stationed in Japan when Red Skelton requested him for a USO tour through Korea. Other members of the cast served in the armed forces. Wayne Rogers, who played Trapper John McIntyre, joined the U.S. Navy, and Mike Farrell, who played B.J. Honeycutt, served in the Marines. Different actors, different roles. McLean Stevenson auditioned for the role of Hawkeye, but was convinced to take the role of Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake instead. Comedian Robert Klein turned down the part of Trapper John. He turned down the role, and there's a rumor he regretted the decision. Robert denies those rumors. Writing the pilot. Larry Gelbart was a veteran screenwriter. He had grown tired of Hollywood, so he moved to London. When he was asked to write the pilot for MASH, he couldn't turn it down. Larry wrote the pilot in 2 days and was paid $25,000. Klinger was only supposed to be in one episode. Klinger was only supposed to be in one episode, and he was supposed to be gay. To keep him on the show, they turned him into a man who cross-dresses to get kicked out of Korea. The character came from Lenny Bruce, who claimed to have been discharged from the Navy for claiming to have homosexual tendencies. It was the network who wanted to use the laugh track. Larry Gelbart and the executive producer Gene Reynolds were against using the laugh track. CBS vetoed this because all 30-minute comedies used them. To compromise, the network agreed not to use the laughing during the scenes in the operating room. As the seasons progressed, they started using the laugh track less and less. In the UK, the BBC didn't use the laugh track at all. CBS didn't want one episode that was considered unpatriotic. There was an episode where the soldiers stood outside in the freezing cold, hoping to make themselves sick enough to be sent home. CBS rejected the episode. This was a tactic that soldiers really used during the Korean War. The writers came up with a great way of dealing with script complaints. The writers were always getting notes and complaints from the cast members about the script. To put an end to this, writer Ken Levine and the other writers changed the script on 2 occasions. The actors had to pretend that it was parka weather on 90 to 100-degree days on the Malibu Ranch set. They took the hint, and the complaints and suggestions stopped. After the cast had to film in the blistering heat while wearing winter jackets, they got the hint that the writers were tired of their notes. Wayne Rogers was able to leave the show because he never signed a contract. Wayne Rogers played Trapper John, and he objected to the standard contract given to all the actors. He didn't like the morals clause of the contract, so he didn't sign. Since he didn't sign the contract, he was able to leave the show after season 3. Rogers says that aside from missing the cast and his friendship with Alan Alda, he has no regrets about leaving the show. Alan Alda wasn't aware of Henry Blake's fate until right before Wayne's final scene. When Wayne decided to leave the show, the writers used this opportunity to make a point about the wastefulness of war. This is why they decided to kill off Henry Blake. The script was handed out with the last page missing. It wasn't until the end of the season wrap party that the cast was given the script and found out that Henry Blake died. Alan Alda was the only actor who knew about Henry's death ahead of time. People didn't like this ending, and over 1,000 fans wrote letters expressing their feelings. CBS didn't like the ending either. When the repeat aired, the final scene was cut. Today, the show still airs reruns, and this final scene isn't cut. It was one of the most shocking endings of an episode in TV history. The names used by the writers. During Season 6, there was an episode that featured 4 Marine patients. The writers named them after the 1977 California Angels infield. During Season 7, the patients were named after the 1978 Los Angeles Dodgers. In the episode, Goodbye Radar, Radar's girlfriend was named after one of Levin's former girlfriends, Patty Haven. The show lasted longer than the war. The series ran for 11 years. The war lasted 3 years, 1 month, and 2 days. The show was such a huge hit that the writers and producers didn't see a problem with the show lasting longer than the actual war. Alan Alda co-wrote and directed 31 episodes of the series. Alan co-wrote and directed 31 episodes, including the finale. He was the first person to ever win an Emmy for acting, directing, and writing of the same show. His time on MASH was the highlight of his career. Many future stars made guest appearances on the show. Many future stars made guest appearances on MASH. Ron Howard played an underage Marine. Leslie Nielsen played a colonel. Patrick Swayze played an injured soldier with leukemia. Other famous guests include John Ritter, Pat Morita, Lawrence Fishburne, George Wendt, Rita Wilson, Ed Begley Jr., Shelley Long, Terry Garr, Blythe Danner, and Andrew Dice Clay. According to the show's producers, there was never a shortage of guest stars because the show was so popular. The series finale is still the most watched episode of television in American history. On Monday, February 28, 1983, 77% of the U.S. population watched the 2.5-hour series finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen. For a regular 30-minute episode, companies had to pay $30,000 to run a 30-second commercial. For the series finale, a commercial cost companies $450,000. More people watched the series finale of the show than they watched the Super Bowl that year, which is shocking. 3 spin-offs. There were 3 spin-offs that came from MASH. Trapper John M.D. aired from 1979 until 1986. It was about Trapper John McIntyre's tenure as chief of surgery in San Francisco. But Wayne Rogers didn't star in the show. After MASH featured Colonel Potter, Father Mulcahy, and Klinger, who all worked in a veterans hospital in Missouri right after the events of MASH. Unfortunately, the show couldn't compete with the A-Team, and it was canceled after the second season. Walter followed Radar as he became a cop in St. Louis after losing his family farm and his wife. The pilot was picked up, but it aired only once on July 17, 1984, only in the Eastern and Central time zones. None of the spin-offs was as successful as the original show. Radar's teddy bear was sold and returned to Gary Berghoff. On the show, Radar often had his teddy bear. When the show ended, the teddy bear was lost for 30 years. It turned up at an auction in 2005, and a medical student bought it for $11,500. When the student purchased the teddy bear, he reached out to Gary and offered to send it to him. Gary jumped at the chance, and after 3 decades, he was reunited with Radar's teddy bear. A construction worker found the show's time capsule. In the show's second-to-last episode, As Time Goes By, the characters bury a time capsule under Fox Ranch. The land was sold 2 months later, and a construction worker found the time capsule. He got in touch with Alan Alda and asked him what he should do with it. Alan told him to keep it. Later, Alan said that the construction worker didn't seem too impressed by the time capsule. This is shocking because the show is so iconic. Most other people would have been thrilled to have such an incredible piece of TV history.
Time-traveling comic book. As you probably know, Radar has a genuine love for comic books, and his collection boasts issues from the 60s and 70s. He's particularly fond of the time-traveling Fantastic Four and has been known to geek out over their adventures with his buddies. In this scene, featured in the Season 1 episode Tuttle, he was spotted relaxing with a copy of Captain Savage and His Battlefield Rangers, number 10, originally released in 1969. MacArthur's inaccurate representation. Throughout the iconic series, Douglas MacArthur is consistently depicted as if he still holds command over the U.S. forces in Korea, despite the fact that he was relieved of his duties by President Truman approximately 10 months into the war on April 11, 1951. On your mark, get set, no. In the Season 6 episode titled MASH Olympics, Potter uses a Smith & Wesson Model 19 snub-nosed pistol to begin the crutch race, despite the fact that this model was not produced until the late 50s. Mickey Mashup. In one memorable scene in the episode The Colonel's House, which was set in Colonel Potter's office, Potter is heard spelling out BJ's father-in-law's name on the telephone. Nearby, Hawkeye, who was within earshot, responds to Potter's spelling by chanting M-O-U-S-E, which is part of the famed theme song for the Mickey Mouse Club show. But the Mickey Mouse Club didn't make its debut on TV until October 3, 1955, more than 2 years after the war ended in Korea. More comic book shenanigans. In a 4th season episode of the series Der Tag, which was aired in the U.S. for the first time on January 6, 1976, Radar is shown snuggled up with his beloved teddy bear and a copy of The Avengers. But that comic was not introduced until 1963, and the cover features the Black Panther, who was not created by Jack Kirby until 1966. In the Novocaine Mutiny episode, additional items from Radar's collection are revealed, such as more issues of The Avengers and Spider-Man, both of which were created in the 60s. Cookie confusion. Later on in that same episode, BJ displays a package of Fig Newtons seen in the clear plastic packaging used in the 1970s. But in 1950, the cookies would have been packaged in the box shown in this image. Duke to the Future. During Season 5, Episode 22, titled Movie Tonight, the members of the 4077th gather in a tent to watch the classic 1946 Henry Fonda film, My Darling Clementine, which is an appropriate choice for the time period. But Radar stands up and entertains the group with his impression of John Wayne, uttering the famous line, "I'm not gonna hit ya, I'm not gonna hit ya, like hell I'm not," in his best attempt at the Duke's signature drawl. Unfortunately, Radar's quote is a paraphrase from a scene in McClintock, which wasn't released until 1963. This further fuels speculation that Radar very well just might be a time traveler. Time traveling on thin ice. In the 7th season episode Baby It's Cold Outside, the group assembles to watch the 1941 film Sun Valley Serenade, which is an ice-capade flick featuring Norwegian figure skater and film star Sonja Henie. Colonel Potter points out a scene where Henie is expected to perform a triple axel and end up in a split, but it should be noted that Midori Ito was the first woman to successfully execute a triple axel in 1988. Furthermore, Carol Heiss was the first woman to perform a double axel in 1953. The perplexing pinball machine. During the 6th episode of Season 10, Wheelers and Dealers, there's another instance of an item that does not align with the show's timeline. Specifically, the Officers Club features various forms of entertainment and facilities, such as the pinball game Spot-A-Card. However, this machine was not manufactured until August of 1960 by manufacturer Gottlieb, which is after the Korean War ended. A monster mistake. In the Season 3 episode Springtime from 1974, there's further indication that the MASH cast might have had access to Marty McFly's DeLorean. Radar once again slips up when he comments that the movie for the night is The Firstborn of Godzilla, but it's worth noting the massive monster didn't make its first appearance until the 1954 film Godzilla, directed by Ishiro Honda. The Blob blooper. Season 2, Episode 18, titled Operation Noselift, includes references to additional classic monster movies in the presence of Radar. During the episode's opening scene, Henry Blake mentions The Blob, which was released in September 1958. Military mistakes. The Season 2 episode For the Good of the Outfit is a classic episode that raises significant questions about the show's writing beyond just the pop culture errors. There are also military anachronisms present, such as a model Bell Huey UH-1 helicopter seen hanging from the ceiling in Henry Blake's office. This helicopter didn't take its first flight until 1956 and is primarily associated with the Vietnam War, making its appearance in a Korean War-era setting anachronistic. Sing Me a Song. In the 61st episode of the series, Mad Dogs and Servicemen, which aired in 1974, Radar is depicted as being bedridden, potentially with a rare, albeit incredibly dangerous case of rabies. To cheer him up, Margaret reads him a letter that mentions two popular songs, Diddy Wah Diddy by Bo Diddley and The Wayward Wind by Goji Grant. But both these catchy songs were released in 1956, several years after the Korean War ended. Questionable hairdos. As the show progressed, it became apparent most of the main characters weren't adhering to the U.S. Army's haircut regulation for the 50s. However, the ever-dignified Colonel Potter, played by Harry Morgan, was a notable exception, exuding an air of authority and professionalism while rocking the appropriate haircut befitting of an officer in that era. Ahead of their time. Put simply, the characters in MASH often expressed social attitudes reflective of the time in which the show was made, rather than the early 50s when it was set. As the show progressed, it became more akin to a contemporary drama rather than a period piece. Nailed it. In defiance of Army regulations and common sense, Margaret's nails in the series are a sight to behold. A nurse and by-the-book Army officer, it's highly unlikely she would be permitted to maintain such long nails. The discrepancy between her appearance and what's expected only adds to her enigmatic character. By any other name. The show makes a few historically inaccurate references regarding governmental organizations, such as referring to the War Department instead of the Department of the Army, which was its renamed title since 1947. It would be more appropriate for the characters to use the correct terminology when discussing orders from Washington, D.C., such as referring to the Department of Defense. Let's do the time warp again. A time warp seems to have taken hold of the world and Colonel Potter's family in MASH. Initially, Potter's only child was a son, whose wife had a daughter. But as the series progressed, Potter suddenly had a grandson named Corey, who grew from a newborn to a 5-year-old in the blink of an eye. And strangely, by the end of the series, Potter's child had become a daughter. Hawkeye's ever-changing backstory. Hawkeye's backstory is a bit of a roller coaster. At first, he hails from Vermont, with both parents being alive, a married sister who sends him a giant homemade sweater, and a nephew. But as the show progresses, we see a different side of him. Hawkeye now claims Crabapple Cove, Maine as his hometown, and he's an only child whose mother passed away when he was around 10. One of the most popular TV characters of all time is Walter Radar O'Reilly. Throughout the span of MASH, viewers saw Gary Berghoff's character Radar transform from a naive 18-year-old who was drafted with his teddy bear by his side into the unifying force of the 4077th. Everyone looked up to him and confided in him. But his appearances began to dwindle after the 6th season, and by the 8th, he was completely absent. Join Facts First as we go over everything there is to know about Gary Berghoff's departure from MASH. The original source material for the show MASH was a novel written by Richard Hooker, who drew inspiration from his time as a doctor in Korea. The novel was then turned into a film that Robert Altman directed, followed by the creation of a TV series based on the story. In its early years, MASH was actually a comedic show, replete with a laugh track despite the serious subject matter. But soon after, it began to take on the characteristics of a dramedy, exploring problems like trauma, racism, and homophobia. Hawkeye Pierce, played by Alan Alda, and it remains his most celebrated role to this day. Fans also cheered for other characters like Wayne Rogers as Trapper and Loretta Swit's Major Hot Lips Houlihan. And then there was Corporal Radar O'Reilly, who got his nickname because he could always seem to sense when his superior officer needed him. Gary Berghoff connected the MASH movie and show. Berghoff is the only actor to portray the same part in both the series and MASH movie, despite other actors from the film having cameo appearances on the show. But there are discrepancies among his depictions. Although the actor first brought Radar's darker, more opportunistic tone from Altman's MASH to the program, he ultimately chose to make the TV version more naive. Radar was written to be 18, though Berghoff was 30 when he was cast. Even though Berghoff's youthful appearance helped cover this, the receding hairline was beginning to be noticeable, so he ultimately put on the hat he wore throughout the series. Why Gary walked away from the show. Episodes 4 and 5 of Season 8 were a two-parter called Goodbye Radar, in which the corporal discovers his uncle has passed away. Colonel Potter made provisions for him to receive a hardship discharge because he knew it would put his mother in a difficult position of having to take care of the family farm by herself. Yet Radar didn't think he could abandon the unit when it was having such a hard time without a generator. Despite Potter and Hawkeye's best efforts, he didn't believe them when they said they'd be okay without him. It wasn't until he saw Klinger bring in a new generator that he acknowledged they'd be fine. After entrusting Hawkeye with his beloved teddy bear, he returns to his native state of Iowa. After taking a long break from the show, Berghoff ultimately decided to quit. His absence from multiple episodes in Season 6 was first attributed to exhaustion, but it has since been theorized that the real reason was that he was universally despised by his co-stars and was notoriously challenging to deal with. The general explanation for his departure during the 8th season was that he was tired of the show's schedule and missed spending time with his family. Gary's decision to leave MASH was difficult, but in the end, he chose to prioritize his family over his career. Filmmaker Charles S. Dubin claims there are many factors at play in his departure. According to a series of interviews Charles gave to the Television Academy Foundation about MASH, Berghoff departed the show not because he felt mistreated, but because he believed he wasn't getting his full obligations. On the other hand, he said there was more to Gary's departure than that. But Burt Metcalf claims that throughout the years, Gary also had trouble performing on set. He had a hard time falling asleep at night, which made him frequently late for work. He also thought Berghoff wasn't enjoying himself as much as the other cast members, and that the actor was itching to try something new. Radar's failed MASH spinoff. Gary Berghoff didn't do much acting after leaving MASH and didn't come back until the sequels. He appeared in 2 episodes of the spin-off After MASH as a guest star. There was also a spin-off attempted starring Radar called Walter. Walter was supposed to kick off a new series, but unfortunately it wasn't picked up. After MASH was the more successful of the 2 spin-offs. The characters of Colonel Potter, Klinger, and Father Mulcahy were followed through their transition to civilian life over the course of 2 seasons. Whereas Trapper John M.D., a long-running medical drama, continued to follow its namesake character after the war ended. The show's creators, however, insisted it was inspired by the book rather than the MASH TV series. After MASH did well in the ratings at first, but it plummeted during its 2nd season and is widely regarded as one of the worst spin-offs made. Gary Berghoff turned down millions when MASH begged him to come back. The producers of MASH were devastated when Berghoff abruptly left the show in 1979, and the series continued without Radar. After just 2 days without him, they returned with cash in hand, hoping to find the appropriate price to keep Radar, proving how serious they were. The Tribune reports that Warner Brothers promised Berghoff a $4 million contract to come back. Alan Alda was the highest-paid TV actor of that time, making $5.6 million per season on MASH, including his earnings as a writer. But Berghoff turned down the money as he wanted to spend more time with his family. Before we go, let's talk about some things you probably never noticed in the MASH episode Goodbye Radar. The first half of the story aired at the start of the 8th season, which was supposed to be the final episode for season 7. For the fall '79 season, the network made a deal with Berghoff to have him return for the remainder of the season, at least through sweeps. First and foremost, Radar's head is no longer in the opening scene. Every episode of MASH's first 7 seasons began with a helicopter landing in the mountains. Considering his name, it should come as no surprise that Radar is the first to pick it up. The initial photo was of Gary Berghoff's back, which seemed appropriate given the context of the show. Since Berghoff's departure from the show was announced at the start of the 8th season, the opening was made without his head. Additionally, his opening credit was changed to also starring Gary Berghoff as Radar. Secondly, the episode was Zelmo Zale's final. In Goodbye Radar, farewells were not limited to Radar. A veteran of the show, Sergeant Zelmo Zale, was played by Johnny Hamer, who debuted in Season 2 and was last seen in Goodbye Radar Part 1. The electrician's side story in Goodbye Radar is largely around his time spent operating the generator. In the episode, Berghoff decided to finally take his trademark cap off. Ken Levine admitted that the iconic headgear worn by Radar proved to be a stumbling block during filming. While shooting, Gary made up his mind that he wouldn't need his hat. This developed into a major problem, as producers claimed he stopped looking like a kid when he took off his hat and started looking like a balding man who had suddenly aged 10 years. But Gary argued that it signified the character's transition from being a kid into a mature man through the course of the war.
Gary Berghoff. Gary Berghoff became a star when he was cast as Corporal Walter Radar O'Reilly. Berghoff played the character in the original film, directed by Robert Altman, and then reprised the role for the TV series. He played it for 7 seasons before leaving the show in 1979. Since he left rather prematurely, there were rumors and speculations about why, but the real reason behind his departure is a bit more complicated. After years of avoiding the subject, Gary Berghoff finally revealed his reasons why he left the show. He left because he was exhausted and burned out. After all, this was one of his first roles, and he was still a new actor when he was cast. After working for 7 seasons, he was exhausted and had lost his passion for the show. Like the other cast members, he was filming long hours. While this is the norm, the pressure of working on such a successful show was taking a toll on this relative newcomer. Gary also revealed he was going through a divorce at the time, and having to balance his personal life with his hectic work schedule was stressful. But he also had issues with different cast members. They felt he was difficult to work with and wasn't easy to get along with. And in fact, one can say the only co-star who truly hated Alan Alda on MASH was Gary Berghoff. He had a tense relationship with Alda, and it seemed that working on set with him was a major stressor for Gary Berghoff. Berghoff had been commuting between California, where it was filmed, and his home in Connecticut, where his family lived. He had to make the decision whether to stick out the show or call it quits. As he put his family first, he chose the latter. But his departure from MASH didn't kill his career. He continued to work in both film and TV. In fact, he later reprised his role in the TV series Walter, which was a spin-off of MASH, though not a successful one. He retired from acting in 2010, which is when he had his last credit. Mike Farrell. MASH was not only a groundbreaking show for its time, but also a platform for actors to showcase their unique talents and their own creativity. Alan Alda and Mike Farrell's friendly rivalry is rather well known, and this translated to their on-screen chemistry. Both were very involved in their character arc during the series. Their rivalry even influenced one of the most memorable episodes. In the episode Preventative Medicine, Farrell's character, B.J. Honeycutt, acted out of character, according to Mike Farrell. He felt the character had to break the Hippocratic Oath and do some unethical things. But Mike felt this was greatly out of character and not appropriate for the show. But they moved on and the script was rewritten as needed. Despite their occasional tiffs here and there, the two always remained friends and a shining example of how actors can challenge themselves when working together. From an outsider's view, it may have seemed that Mike was another actor who truly hated Alan Alda, but this couldn't have been further from the truth. The competitive friendship between Alda and Farrell was not limited to this episode.
Throughout the show's run, they both pushed each other and believed their rivalry would help them give better performances on screen. If you're a newcomer to the show, you'll be impressed by it and the chemistry between these two great actors. While some of the cast members had issues and this ultimately caused them to leave, Mike Farrell was true to his character and also wanted Alan and his fellow cast members to give their best performances. And that's part of why the show became one of television's biggest successes. Wayne Rogers. Wayne Rogers played Trapper John McIntyre, and he was a beloved member of the cast. One could easily say Trapper John was one of the best characters of the show. It's no surprise that Trapper John MD became such a successful spin-off from MASH, definitely better than Walter. Yet his departure from the show in Season 3 left fans wondering why. Trapper's exit wasn't properly addressed in the show, but there are several reasons why actor Wayne Rogers left the series. According to Wayne, one of the main reasons he left was due to a contract dispute. He actually hadn't even signed a contract in the first place. He didn't particularly like the direction of his character and eventually felt that Trapper John was no more than a sidekick. He must have been thrilled when he got to reprise the role he liked, but in a larger capacity on Trapper John MD. As a result, Wayne Rogers left MASH as he wanted to pursue other opportunities. He wanted to explore other acting roles, and he also had an interest in producing and directing. Rogers' departure from MASH was a significant loss for the show, and his absence was felt by both the cast and fans. He did briefly come back later for a few episodes, and it was revealed that Trapper John had been discharged. By this time, Wayne Rogers was a rather well-known actor. Despite leaving MASH, Wayne continued to act in other projects and remained a beloved actor in the industry. He also pursued a successful career in business, becoming a well-respected investor and financial commentator. He continued to work and film in TV until 2003 when he retired. He passed away in 2015. Upon his death, he received praise from co-star Alan Alda. The two of them sometimes struggled on set with each other, but they both had respect for each other. Alda expressed gratitude for Wayne and talked about how much he loved working with him on the show. Larry Linville. Larry Linville played Frank Burns, and his portrayal of the character is still remembered today, though not always favorably. He stated that Frank Burns was not the most pleasant character, and he had to make him as unlikable as possible. Larry explained that Frank Burns was someone who was deeply insecure. This was combined with a deep desperation to be liked and appreciated by others. His character was so hated that sometimes fans would write angry letters about him. He played the character as someone always trying to get approval and attention. His neediness and desperation made the character so unlikable, but he loved playing the character and later credited the writing team with helping him create it. He also felt the writers gave him the opportunity to act alongside his co-stars like Alan Alda, whom he loved working with. One of the best aspects of Frank Burns was his absurd laugh. Larry Linville later explained he came up with the laugh himself. He wanted to create something that would make the character memorable, outside of his irritable personality. The obnoxious laugh was based on the sound of a goose honking. But in spite of the unlikable personality of Frank Burns, Larry's portrayal of the character was widely praised by fans and critics. He was even nominated for an Emmy for his work on the show. In addition to his role on MASH, Larry had a successful career as an actor, appearing in numerous TV shows and movies. Nevertheless, his portrayal of Frank Burns remains his most popular role. Looks like he had the last laugh, the one that sounds like a goose. When the series finale of MASH aired in 1983, fans eagerly tuned in to watch the show's emotional send-off. While it may have been a fitting ending to the series, it wasn't actually the last episode that was filmed. Instead, the last episode filmed was the previous episode, which featured the characters of MASH coming together to bury a time capsule. The filming of this episode proved the last time the cast and crew were ever together, and hundreds of journalists were gathered to commemorate the momentous occasion. Join Factsverse as we take a look at rare footage from the last MASH episode ever filmed. Although the series finale may have provided a fitting ending to the series, the episode wasn't actually the last episode of MASH that was filmed. Instead, the final episode was the penultimate one. It was called As Time Goes By. It revolved around the show's characters getting the idea to bury a time capsule commemorating their time in the war. Given that the cast and crew of MASH had been filming the show for 11 seasons, the filming of As Time Goes By proved an incredibly emotional occasion.
The episode aired on February 21, 1983, though it had been filmed a month previously. The filming had occurred on January 14th. According to the cast and crew, the filming was incredibly emotional. The time capsule they buried on screen featured real-life props from the series, meaning that the on-screen time capsule doubled as an actual time capsule for the cast and crew. Sadly, the time capsule ended up being dug up shortly after filming due to construction that was happening around it. Actor Mike Farrell shared after filming that it was hard for him to film the scene of them burying the time capsule, knowing it would be the last time the cast would ever be standing together on set. The burial of the time capsule was the final scene filmed, and the event was so emotional for the cast and crew, the director actually had to try to keep them from crying to get the scene done. Just as occurs in the plot of As Time Goes By, the cast and crew gathered things from their time together to put in the time capsule. Some of the things included props and costumes. Though it was dug up shortly after, it was reburied and is said to currently still reside somewhere on the 20th Century Fox lot. In addition to the cast and crew of MASH, the event was also attended by hundreds of journalists. There were estimated to be around 300 journalists present for the final scene of MASH that was ever filmed. According to Alan Alda, the presence of the journalists distracted from the cast and crew's enjoyment of the experience to a degree. It was meant to be a very personal moment for those who'd worked on the show, and the intrusion of the journalist ruined some of the intimacy. But it still proved a very meaningful experience for those involved, as well as audiences at home. While the plot of the time capsule was the main storyline in the penultimate episode of MASH, there were also a few other plot lines going through it. The character of Margaret spearheaded the campaign to create the time capsule, while other stories involved Father Mulcahy taking care of some refugees and Hawkeye trying to track down a missing helicopter pilot. The pilot never ends up being found, which leads Hawkeye to bury a piece of the pilot's helicopter alongside the time capsule at the end of the episode. According to Hawkeye, he does this to not only commemorate the pilot, but also to pay respects to all that was lost in the war. As Time Goes By ended up being the only episode of MASH to include a dedication. It was dedicated to a woman named Connie Isay. Connie was a registered nurse that had served as a technical advisor on the series for several years, starting in 1977 and ending with her death from cancer in 1982. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like and subscribe to Facts First for more. And stick around for more about MASH's filming. While As Time Goes By wasn't the final episode of MASH that aired, it was the episode that was filmed last. The series finale gave folks at home a chance to say goodbye to the series, but the filming of As Time Goes By was the cast and crew's time to say goodbye. The episode starts with the character of Winchester reading a newspaper that features an article about the burial of a time capsule. Although Winchester doesn't think a time capsule is a good idea, Margaret hears him talking about it and decides she wants to make one for the 4077th. Of course, 4077 is the number assigned to the character's Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, which is of course what MASH stands for. When Margaret shares the idea with Hawkeye, he initially doesn't seem like he's all that into it, but he comes around to the idea soon after hearing it. He and Margaret end up butting heads over what they think should be buried in the time capsule. Hawkeye wants to help Margaret decide what ends up going into it, while Margaret feels she should be able to decide what goes into it by herself. In addition to that plot, there's also the aforementioned plot of the refugees, as well as the matter of the missing helicopter pilot. However, most fans will have much more fond memories of the main plot of the episode, which is the one about the time capsule. Margaret ends up collecting a good deal of meaningful things to put in there. As she goes about collecting them, Hawkeye also collects some things of his own. Some of the things he collects include a bottle of cognac that he took from Winchester and a piece of toast he took from Igor. The strange nature of the items Hawkeye has chosen to include initially annoys Margaret, as she feels Hawkeye has purposely chosen the items to mock her efforts to commemorate the 4077th. But she soon realizes Hawkeye is being sincere in his efforts and simply has different tastes about what should end up in the time capsule. Over the course of the episode, Margaret and Hawkeye end up becoming closer than ever as they decide to bury the metaphorical hatchet of their longtime feud alongside the 4077th's chosen belongings. Other items that end up being buried include some spark plugs offered up by Rizzo, combat boots offered up by Kelly, a selection of Zane Grey novels offered up by Colonel Potter, a fishing lure from BJ, and a teddy bear that had been left behind by the character of Radar, who was no longer on the series by the time of the show's 11th season. Father Mulcahy also offers up a pair of boxing gloves to place in the time capsule because his hope for the future is that there will be no need for weapons any stronger than boxing gloves. Finally, Hawkeye offers the aforementioned piece of the missing pilot's helicopter. While Margaret is initially angry at Hawkeye's insistence that the overly large piece of scrap be buried alongside her time capsule, she eventually relents once she understands the sentiment. The piece ends up being buried alongside the time capsule, and the scene marked the very last scene of MASH ever filmed. As soon as the director wrapped the scene, the surrounding hundreds of journalists enclosed on the set to get pictures of the tearful cast and crew's candid reactions. The series finale, Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, was actually the first episode of MASH's 11th season to be shot, but the series finale proved a fitting ending to the series that pleased fans. It was actually a made-for-TV film that aired February 28th, just a week after the airing of As Time Goes By. The feature-length series finale follows the crew saying their goodbyes in preparation for their disbandment. Given that the cast and crew had plenty more episodes to film after, the filming of the episode wasn't nearly as emotional as the filming of As Time Goes By. For decades now, fans of the series have been debating what the best episodes are. Over the years, some of the show's cast members have revealed what some of their favorites were. Join Facts as we take a look back at some of the episodes that have been said to be among the award-winning series' best. Alan Alda's favorite episodes, Dear Sigmund and In Love and War. In Dear Sigmund, which Alda directed, Major Sidney Friedman, a psychiatrist and recurring character, pens a letter to Sigmund Freud in which he tells several stories of the medical field unit while describing each character with a brief vignette. His letter converges with the episode's somewhat cheesy plotline in which the camp is berated by the shenanigans of a mysterious prankster. It turns out the clandestine trickster was a man named Captain B.J. Honeycutt. After Friedman figures out it was him all along, he offers to assist him in pranking Major Burns. In the episode In Love and War, which was also co-written and directed by Alda, Hawkeye falls in love with a Korean villager, despite being warned explicitly by Colonel Potter not to. Another subplot involved Margaret learning her husband, Donald, might have put the moves on a nurse recently assigned to the unit. Hey, if you're enjoying this video so far, be sure to give it a like, and subscribe to Facts if you haven't already, and stick around for more favorite episodes of MASH. Mike Farrell's favorite episodes, Welcome to Korea and Quo Vadis, Captain Chandler. Welcome to Korea is a two-parter that kicked off the premiere of Season 4. Its plot deals primarily with Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake's death, which occurred at the end of Season 3. It also touches on Trapper John McIntyre's departure from the 4077th. Trapper John left abruptly without even telling Hawkeye farewell, leading Hawkeye to chase after him in an attempt at getting some closure. After Trapper John took his leave, Major Frank Burns and Margaret Houlihan find themselves giddy at the idea of being able to mold whoever McIntyre's replacement will be into whatever they see fit. Quo Vadis Captain Chandler hit the airwaves in 1975, and it revolves around a group of injured soldiers who arrive at camp to receive treatment. One of these is a bomber pilot who claims he's Jesus Christ. Frank and Margaret assume he's faking his battle fatigue in an attempt at getting discharged, and they end up bringing him to Colonel Flagg to help expose him. Flagg basically bullies the traumatized recruit, which leads to Potter standing up for him. Loretta Swit's favorite episodes, Hot Lips and Empty Arms, and Margaret's Engagement. Loretta Swit, who portrayed Major Margaret Houlihan, listed the episode Hot Lips and Empty Arms as one of her favorites. In it, her character receives a letter that forces her to re-evaluate her life in the 4077th before dumping rank and requesting a transfer. In the Season 5 episode Margaret's Engagement, Major Houlihan's sudden engagement takes everyone by surprise. Naturally, her ex, Frank, takes the news the hardest. William Christopher's favorite episodes, Dear Sis and Mulcahy's War. Who doesn't love a good Christmas special? In the Season 7 episode Dear Sis, the 4077th battles depression while spending the holiday in wartime Korea. Father Mulcahy is especially dejected, feeling as if he isn't making a difference. In Mulcahy's War, which aired in 1976, Father Mulcahy finds himself troubled by his lack of experience at the front, insisting that he tag along with Radar on a trip there. Harry Morgan's favorite episodes, The UN, The Night and the Music, and The General Flipped at Dawn. Harry Morgan directed the Season 11 episode, The UN, The Night, and the Music. Its plot involves 3 UN delegates who pay a visit to the 4077th and leave a lasting impression on the staff and personnel. Meanwhile, BJ treats a patient's leg injury, which unfortunately might require amputation. Larry Gelbart directed the Season 3 episode, The General Flipped at Dawn. In it, a general visiting the camp comes across as a bit more eccentric than the typical Army bigwigs, while being pretty stringent about regulations. He even tries to relocate the camp closer to the front. Additionally, he attempts to court-martial Hawkeye before everyone realizes that he's in fact off his rocker. Jamie Farr's favorite episodes, Officer of the Day and Big Mac. Season 3 had quite a few of MASH's most memorable episodes. In the season's third episode, Officer of the Day, in Henry's absence, Hawkeye gets assigned by Frank Burns as Officer of the Day. He then has to deal with the daily chaos that typically plagues the 4077th while attempting to thwart Colonel Flagg's plans to take matters into his own hands by executing his Korean prisoner. Big Mac, yet another excellent Season 3 episode, centers around the camp's preparations for a visit from General Douglas MacArthur. While they're getting ready, Klinger throws a wrench in everyone's gears with his attempt at earning a Section 8 discharge. A few of Jamie Farr's other favorites. In 2017, Jamie Farr, who played the cross-dressing Corporal Maxwell Klinger, did an interview with MeTV, where he discussed several of his other favorite MASH episodes. In the episode Chief Surgeon Who, Farr got the chance to introduce the world to Klinger's unorthodox wardrobe preference for the first time. Then there's the fantastic episode The Trial of Henry Blake, in which Farr got the chance to take flight on a hang glider. In the episode Crisis, a combination of cramped quarters and Klinger's signature offbeat ways lead to some of the funniest moments and lines of dialogue in the show's run. The episode Springtime details several absurd events that happened during a pleasant spring day in Korea. One of these involves Klinger receiving a letter from his girlfriend Laverne, who accepts his marriage proposal. Farr says this is one of the fondest memories of his time on the series. Fan favorite episodes. The episode Tuttle is often regarded by fans as one of MASH's finest. Lovers of the series fondly remember it for its strange but heartfelt plotline, which involves Hawkeye and Trapper diverting their supplies to an orphanage while conjuring up a little white lie about a fictional Captain Tuttle as a cover story. Eventually, with a little help from Radar, the two manage to convince the entire camp that Tuttle is a genuine person. They even manage to get 14 months of back pay for the fictitious officer before faking his death so the orphanage can collect Captain Tuttle's GI insurance as his sole beneficiary. The Season 3 finale, Abyssinia Henry, while being somewhat controversial, is widely regarded as the series' best episode. In it, Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake is discharged and makes plans to go back home to Bloomington, Illinois. Sadly, he dies en route. What makes this episode really stand out is the fact that it's one of the first episodes to highlight the personal cost of war. It's also the moment the show shifts away from solely being a comedy. Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen is MASH's heart-tugging series finale. It holds the distinction of being the most watched television show in American history. It's the only broadcast offering that has ever appeared in the top 20 that wasn't the Super Bowl. Now recently, we've been hit with the news that a couple of cast members from the iconic TV series MASH have taken their final bows, leaving us with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow. Facts First presents more MASH cast members have died, now he's all that's left. Eileen Saki. Eileen Saki, the talented actress who played Rosie, the bar owner in MASH, passed away on Monday, May 1st, 2023, in Los Angeles after a courageous battle with pancreatic cancer at age 79. Her representative confirmed the news of her passing to various news outlets. She graced 9 episodes of MASH, a show centered around the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital during the Korean War, which aired between 1972 and 83. As the proprietor of Rosie's Bar, Eileen was the third and longest-serving actor to fill the role. Even after her time on the series ended, her acting career persisted, with appearances in projects such as Splash alongside Tom Hanks, playing Dr. Fujimoto, as well as roles on Chips and History of the World Part 1. Born in Japan to a gardener, Eileen relatively recently shared her life story on the MASH Matters podcast with her co-star Jeff Maxwell. She expressed her lifelong desire to be a performer since the age of 4, seeking an exciting and glamorous life beyond her humble beginnings. Her journey led her to the role of Rosie on MASH after a fortuitous encounter with Burt Metcalf on the Fox lot. Following her time on the show, she approached Metcalf for further opportunities, which led to her involvement in History of the World Part 1. Having successfully battled lung cancer in 2004, Eileen returned to the world of entertainment, most recently appearing in a 2022 Uber Eats commercial. Jeff Maxwell, who played Private Igor Straminsky, paid tribute to Eileen on the MASH Matters podcast and shared his heartfelt words on their Facebook page. Judy Farrell. Judy Farrell, best known for her portrayal of Nurse Abel, passed away from a stroke at age 84 on Sunday, April 2nd, 2023. Hailing from Quapaw, Oklahoma, Farrell's passion for theater took root early in her life. She pursued her dreams and obtained a fine arts degree in theater from Oklahoma State University, followed by a master's at UCLA. It was there she met Mike Farrell in 1961, and they were married 2 years later. They had 2 children, Michael and Aaron, before parting ways in 1983. Farrell's acting journey began in the 60s alongside her husband at the Laguna Playhouse. Her TV debut came in 1969 with a guest appearance on Get Smart. She went on to play various roles in shows like The Partridge Family, The Rookies, Room 222, Emergency, and Benson. Most notably, she played Nurse Abel in 8 episodes of MASH. Her character often assisted doctors in the OR or delivered messages to them. An episode even incorporated her real-life marriage to Mike Farrell. Farrell also explored writing, contributing 13 episodes to the soap opera Port Charles from 1998 to 2003. She also wrote a TV movie called The Kid from Nowhere in 1982, featuring her husband and son. Her other acting credits include a recurring role as Mrs. Miller on Fame and appearances in TV movies like Intimate Strangers, Fugitive Family, and Long-Term Relationship. She retired from acting in 2006. Loretta Swit, who played Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan in MASH, considered Farrell a part of her family. In a recently published interview, Swit reminisced about their time together, describing Judy as a beautiful person both inside and out. She acknowledged the pain of losing her dear friend, but emphasized she would forever cherish her memory. Let's take a moment to check in with the surviving cast members of the iconic series. Loretta Swit. As one of the 4 stars to grace all 11 seasons of MASH, Loretta Swit played head nurse Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan. With her exceptional performance, she won 2 Emmys and appeared in nearly every episode, ranking second only to Alan Alda in terms of total credits. Houlihan's self-proclaimed army brat background made her an initial antagonist, but Swit skillfully navigated a wide range of captivating emotional arcs throughout the show's run. Following MASH, Swit continued her television career, lending her voice to shows like Batman the Animated Series and Cow and Chicken. Now 85, Swit's involvement in the entertainment industry has slowed, but her remarkable portfolio of roles remains a testament to her talent. She's maintained close relationships with many of her MASH co-stars, including Alda and the late Harry Morgan, who played Colonel Sherman T. Potter in the show's later seasons. Apart from acting, Swit has authored books on needlepoint and watercolor painting, and is a dedicated animal rights activist. In 1989, she received a well-deserved star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Sally Kellerman, the original Hot Lips from the 1970 Robert Altman film that inspired the series, passed away in 2022. Alan Alda. At age 87, Alan Alda remains a prominent figure in Hollywood. As Captain Hawkeye Pierce, Alda was not only the star of MASH, but also one of its driving creative forces. He, like Swit, is one of just 4 main characters to appear in every season, establishing himself as a cornerstone of the series. Interestingly, Alda served in the military during the Korean War, providing him with a unique perspective on his character. As the most unconventional surgeon of the group, his blend of sharp comedic timing and intense emotional acting mirrored the balance that made the show extraordinary. By the time MASH ended, Alda had amassed an astounding 25 Emmy Award nominations and 12 Golden Globe nods for his work. Post-MASH, Alan continued to thrive in the entertainment industry, starring in major films like Crimes and Misdemeanors and Bridge of Spies, as well as TV series like ER, The West Wing, and 30 Rock. In recent years, Alda has candidly discussed his battle with Parkinson's disease and became a prominent spokesman for raising awareness about the condition. Despite his struggles, he delivered a memorable performance in the 2019 Oscar-nominated film Marriage Story, starring Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. In recognition of his extensive career as an actor, writer, director, and producer, Alan received the Screen Actors Guild Life Achievement Award that same year. Jamie Farr. One of the most unforgettable performances in MASH came from Jamie Farr, who portrayed the cross-dressing Lebanese-American corporal Maxwell Klinger. Today, Klinger remains a fascinating and multifaceted character, prompting discussions on whether his portrayal was progressive or homophobic. What's undeniable is Klinger found solace and happiness in wearing traditionally feminine clothes amidst the chaos, tragedy, and death of war. Farr has a star on the famed Hollywood Walk of Fame and appeared in each and every season of MASH. He also starred in the short-lived sequel series after MASH, which followed the post-war lives of Klinger, Harry Morgan's Sherman T. Potter, and the late William Christopher's Father Mulcahy. Now 88, Farr's acting credits include shows like The Love Boat, That 70s Show, and Family Guy, as well as films such as the Cannonball Run series. Although Farr has become less active in the industry, his exceptional portrayal of Klinger on MASH ensures his enduring legacy. Gary Berghoff. Gary Berghoff played Corporal Walter Eugene Radar O'Reilly. He played the role in both the 1970 film as well as the series. Both of those were adapted from Richard Hooker's book, MASH, a novel about 3 Army doctors. In the film, Radar was depicted as a solitary, darker, and somewhat sardonic character, while the TV adaptation showcased a more innocent and naive persona. He received 6 Emmy nods and 1 win for his work on the series before departing the show in 1979. Mike Farrell. Farrell played his role throughout the entire show, and his character was responsible for the iconic goodbye spelled out in white rocks in the series finale. He earned 2 Emmy nominations for his performance on the series. After MASH, Farrell enjoyed a successful acting career with appearances in Murder, She Wrote, Law & Order, Special Victims Unit, and Desperate Housewives. He also secured a leading role in the 1999 series Providence. Now 84, he's actively involved in numerous political and social causes. He's a member of PETA, served as a co-chair for the California Human Rights Watch for 10 years, and was president of Death Penalty Focus for over a decade. Now it's time to hear from you. Who was your favorite character from MASH? Let us know.